Hello friends, in the previous lectures we have been considering different defects that we can observe in a material. So we saw that a criteria to observe a defect in a material is that the atoms in the material should be regularly arranged in a long range. So only when you have a long range regular arrangement of atoms, it is possible for us to identify defects. The other way of describing this is that the defects are nothing but a disturbance or an imperfection in the long range regular arrangement of the atoms. And since we have a long range regular arrangement of the atoms in crystalline materials, we are able to identify or realize defects in the crystalline material. In the previous lectures, we saw few forms of the defects. One is the point defect. In order to identify the point defect, we have to be sure that the atoms, they occupy specific positions in the lattice or in the overall three dimension of the crystalline material. The atoms should occupy specific positions, and only then you will be able to identify the point defects. Now, these positions are called lattice sites, and when any lattice site is absent, we refer to that as vacancy. And if there is any atom that is present in a non-lattice site, we refer to as the interstitial atom. So in pure materials, we refer to we have a term self in order to indicate that whatever we are observing is a pure we are observing this particular defect in a pure material, and the atom that we see in the interstitial or the non-lattice site should ideally be present at the lattice site. And in addition to the point defect, we consider a planar defect, which is largely categorized under line defect, and this planar defect that we saw is referred to as the stacking fault. Now, in order to identify or realize the stacking fault, we have to be sure about what is the stacking sequence of a crystal in a particular direction along a particular, or in a particular plane along a particular direction. Only when you are familiar with the stacking sequence, you will be able to identify the stacking fault. Now, supposing, let us consider say for instance FCC crystal structure. Now, in this crystal structure we saw, depending on the plane you consider, there are two stacking sequences that are possible. Now, if you could recollect, the stacking sequence is nothing but you begin by considering a single plane and representing the plane in a two dimension, and you begin on you start to build up on that plane by adding atoms or the next layer of atoms onto it, so that it comes towards you. When the arrangement of the atoms are identical, you give same nomenclature, so it will be A. When the center or the positions of the atoms are shifted in the next plane, you give a different nomenclature, so it will be AB. And the third layer of atoms, when it is different from the preceding two layers, then you would give a new nomenclature. If not, you will give a nomenclature to which the third layer of atom correspond to. Supposing the third layer of atoms, they have a similar arrangement to that of the first layer, then it will be ABA. So this we saw in the previous lecture. Now, let us consider the FCC crystal structure. So these are the atomic positions here. So I will distinguish between the atoms that occupy the corners and the atoms that occupy the center of the phases. So this is the FCC crystal structure, and we have indicated the atoms that occupy the corners and the center of the faces. Now, if we consider, for instance, so this would be our x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis. If we consider the family of planes of 1, 0, 0, or 1, 0, 0 family of plane, then the arrangement will be something like this. You will have an arrangement that looks something like this. The first layer would look something like this. Now the second layer, so this one is the, so this atom is the face centered atom. And now if you consider the second layer, the atoms occupy a position that is in this voids. So these two atoms, meaning the atoms along the corners, they don't touch each other, they leave a void, and the second layer of atom, that is these atoms, they occupy this void here. And that is the reason why in this particular plane along this direction we refer to the stacking sequence of FCC with respect to the family of plane 100 as AB, AB, AB and so on. Now if you want to have a fault in the sequence, it means the next layer following A should have a position that is similar or identical to that of A. So if you want to have a stacking fault, a defect in this stacking sequence, if you want to have a defect or an irregularity in the stacking sequence along 100 plane, then the arrangement of atoms in the second layer should be similar to that of the arrangement of the atoms in the first and the third layer. So let me repeat, when you want to have stacking fault in AB, AB, AB sequence, then the arrangement of atoms in the second layer should be identical to the arrangement of the atoms in the first and the third layer. So similarly, to put it more in, you can say in a more general sense that when you want to have a stacking fault in a AB-AB system or a AB-AB sequence, then 3 layers of atoms should have identical atomic positions. 3 layers of atoms should have identical atomic positions. So this means what you would need to introduce stacking fault along or in 100 plane of FCC, you would need to have arrangement of atoms something similar to this. So you should have 3 layers of atoms that are identical. So this is just a schematic representation along a particular direction, like when you view along this direction. So in that case, you would need to have 3 layers of atoms that have identical positions. So this is energetically highly unfavorable. So therefore, unfavorable. So therefore, it is very rare to find a stacking fault when you have a stacking sequence of AB, AB and so on. So when you have a stacking sequence of something like that, since having a fault in this sequence is energetically or highly unfavorable, you need sufficient amount of energy or very high energy in order to have a stacking sequence of stacking faults of A, and then AB, AB and so on, since you have 3 identically arranged atoms and energy required for having such an arrangement is quite high or significantly high, and since it is largely unfavored from the energetic point of view, it is very rare or highly improbable to have a stacking fault when you have a sequence AB, AB and AB. So therefore, the stacking fault is usually observed when you have a stacking sequence of A, BC, A, BC and so on. So in FCC, the stacking sequence or stacking fault is largely confined to a particular plane and along a particular direction. Therefore, whenever you have crystals wherein in most cases the stacking sequence can be represented by AB, AB, to find stacking fault in that crystals is highly improbable. And even in FCC, to find stacking fault, you have to look along a particular plane. In all planes, you will not be able to find the stacking fault. And the reason for it is whenever you should have or the possibility of having a stacking fault in a stacking sequence that is represented by AB, AB and so on, you need to have three layers of atoms that have identical atomic positions, and energetically it is highly unfavorable, and that is the reason why you have a stacking fault that is usually observed in the stacking sequence, wherein you have this sort of an arrangement, ABC, ABC, and so on. Moreover, supposing if instead of B you have an arrangement that is different from, supposing instead of in this particular stacking sequence, instead of B you have an arrangement that is different from that of A, but is also not similar to that of B. Imagine you have a condition wherein you have an arrangement of atom in this position which is not identical to A, but it is not also identical to B. So it is not identical to B and it is also not identical to A. So in that case, what you would have is a different, or in that case you should use a different nomenclature. So it should be AC, AB, AB, and so on. So would this contribute to a stacking fault? Now, this will not contribute to a stacking fault because this is nothing but a change in the position of the atoms with respect to A. And whenever we give a nomenclature to the next layer, whenever the next layer is different from that of the preceding layer, we give one nomenclature to it, and that nomenclature is usually B. We don't compare B or this layer to that of the layer that comes next to the following layer. So we will usually never compare while giving the nomenclature. So supposing you have the arrangement A, C, A, B, and so on. So let us refer to this as the first layer, second layer, third layer, and fourth layer. While giving nomenclature to C, all that we consider is the atomic arrangement in C identical to that of its preceding layer, that is A. If the atomic arrangement in the layer 2 is identical to that of its preceding layer 1, then we would give a nomenclature that is similar to 1, that is A. If not, the nomenclature would be B. Now, when we do that, we never consider the arrangement or compare the arrangement in the layer 2 and layer 4. Therefore, the conventional way of naming this particular sequence would be AB, AB, and so on. Even though the BC here or the B here might be different from that of the B here, since the nomenclature in this layer 2, it is with respect to the arrangement of atoms in plane 1, we give a nomenclature B here, not C. Therefore, even when you have an arrangement in such a way that the planes in 2 and plane 4 are different based on the positions of the atoms, we give the nomenclature B for the plane 2 because it is with respect to A, and therefore this condition will not be referred to as the stacking fault. This is not a stacking fault. Now, these are few things that I want to ensure that you are clear about the stacking fault. So one is, when you have a stacking sequence AB, AB, and so on, it is highly improbable to have a stacking fault in that sequence. Secondly, when the layers sandwiched between two identical layers are different from one that succeeds the three layers, even though the atomic arrangement in layer 2 and layer 4 are different, that is, the layer 2 that is sandwiched between 1 and 3 is different from that of the layer 4, it will not be referred or considered as a stacking fault, because all that we need in layer 2 is something that is different from layer 1 and 3. Therefore, this will not be considered as a stacking fault. Now, in the previous lecture, we saw all of this thing in the context of line defect. So even though we qualified stacking fault as a specific form of the line defect referred to as the planar defect, some of you might not have been convinced why we categorize this under line defect. As a matter of fact, when you Google stacking fault, one of the questions that immediately pops up is what kind of a defect is the stacking fault? And I hope you don't have such ambiguous questions in your exams that you face elsewhere, but this is a question that is really difficult to answer, and it is really difficult for us to get convinced why we refer to stacking fault, or we categorize stacking fault as in the line defect and a particular form of the line defect. So let us try to justify why we refer to the stacking fault or categorize it under the line defect, even though it is easy for us to refer to it as the planar defect, and since planes are nothing but surfaces, it is easy for us to relate stacking fault to surface defects. Let's see why it is more preferable to be categorized under line defect. Now, so far what we have been doing is we have been referring to stacking sequence that enabled us to identify the stacking fault using the nomenclatures A, B, C and so on. So these are the stacking sequence, and this enabled us to identify stacking fault, and this we have referred it using different letters. Now let us do it in another way. Let us do it graphically. Let us use 3 different colors to distinguish each of the layers. So this layer here would be A, and let me use blue to refer to as the second layer, that is B, and red for C. And this will go on. So you will have your A, and then you will have your B, and finally you will have your C. So this is one way of representing the stacking sequence. So this is the ideal stacking sequence. Whenever we say the stacking fault means any disturbance or irregularity in the stacking sequence, so we say that this ABC, and what should be ABC again, there might be a possibility of one layer of atom missing, and you have AC, and then you continue with your ABC, and this is the stacking fault here. So this is how we defined the stacking fault. However, if you could imagine, it is highly improbable that a whole layer of atoms within the material vanishes off. So how this stacking fault is observed experimentally or physically is that you have your A layer of atom, and you would have your B layer of atom. Now what would happen is the C layer of atom will be missing some segment, and you will have your again A layer of atom, your B layer of atom, and your C layer of atoms. Now here you have a regular stacking sequence of A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. However, when you consider here, you have A, B, and there is no C in this region, but you have A, B, C. The stacking sequence in this within the material, when you compare here, so locally in this region, the stacking sequence is A, B, C. So the C, which should be here, is missing locally, and this is what we refer to as the stacking fault. So the stacking fault doesn't mean the entire layer of atom is missing all through the material, but locally it might be missing. And that means you are introduced a stacking fault, or a stacking fault is observed locally in this region alone. So in this region you have a stacking fault, and this stacking fault is introduced by a missing of a specific layers of atoms. And since this stacking fault is categorized by missing of a specific layer of atom, we refer to this as intrinsic stacking fault. Whenever the stacking fault is because of the missing layers of atoms, we refer to it as the intrinsic stacking fault. Now it is important to note that this stacking fault, it is not global, it is not, we do not observe the stacking fault all through the material, but it is local, meaning you have a missing layer of atoms in the C particular with reference to a particular section of the material. So the missing atoms is in the layer C is confined to a particular region or a local region that is highlighted in green, and in that region, when you consider the stacking fault, you have the C missing in the stacking sequence. However, when you move away from that local region, you would have a regular stacking sequence. Now the stacking fault is confined to this region wherein you have C layer of atoms that is missing. Now when you have a C layer of atom that is missing, you would have a distortion that is caused in the other layers that actually increases the energy of the system. So when you have a C layer of atom that is missing, you have a distortion in the neighboring layers, and this causes an increase in the energy, and this is what is referred to as the stacking fault energy. So the introduction of stacking fault in a regular stacking sequence introduces a distortion, and this can be translated into an increase in energy of the system. So this is localized, so it should be per unit area. So therefore it should be, or it is referred to as the stacking fault energy. Now we saw that in case of missing, or when you have a lack of certain section of atoms in a given layer, we refer to that as the intrinsic stacking fault. Similarly, there is also a possibility of the extrinsic stacking fault. In case of extrinsic stacking fault, what you would observe is an addition of a new layer of atoms. So here a section in the existing layer has been removed or has disappeared, leading to an intrinsic stacking fault. In case of extrinsic stacking fault, you will have an inclusion of a section of a layer of atoms. So this would look something like this. You would have your A layer of atoms, your B layer of atoms, and your C layer of atoms. And between A and between C, the next one should be A, but you would have a small layer of B present here, and the A would be followed by the small layer of B. So this will be your A, and this will be your B, and this would be your C. So here you will have a regular stacking sequence. However, when you consider this local stacking sequence here, it will be A, B, C, and B here, and you will have your A again, B again, C again. So if you consider the local stacking sequence in this region that is highlighted in green, we can write that as A, B, C, B, A, B, C. So here we have a stacking fault. So this is referred to as the extrinsic stacking fault. Now it is important to note that similar to the intrinsic stacking fault, we have a distortion. The distortion introduced by the extrinsic stacking fault. There will also be a distortion introduced by the extrinsic stacking fault. However, the direction of it will be different. So it will be something like this. So the distortion introduced by the new layer of atoms will be something like this. And this distortion leads to the increase in energy, and this is what we refer to as the stacking fault energy. And given that we have the plane of atoms, not the whole plane of the atoms, but the section of the plane of atoms introduced into the regular stacking sequence, and this is what we refer to as the stacking fault. This is possibly being categorized under the line defect. This is one of the reasons. Could be they have categorized under the line defect. So the better representation of the stacking fault would be using the line representation, and considering that not the whole of the plane of atom is introduced is introduced into the existing sequence to bring about the stacking fault. It's just a portion of the plane of atoms that is introduced to bring about the stacking fault. We refer to this, or we categorize the stacking fault, even though it's a planar defect, we categorize under the line defect. Now, similar to the stacking fault, there are also other line defects. One of the line defects is the grain boundary. Now we defined a defect as a region in a material wherein the regular arrangement of the atoms is missing. And if you consider the grain boundaries, again you might have been familiar with how a grain boundary looks like. So in case of the grain boundary, you have the combination of two orientations. Supposing this is one of the way the atoms are oriented, and in the neighboring grain you have atoms oriented in this direction. So this may be grain 1 and this may be grain 2. So this is the regular arrangement of the atoms oriented in this direction, a regular arrangement of the atoms oriented in this direction in grain 1 and 2 respectively. The grain boundary, however, the regularity in the arrangement of the atom is missing. So if you consider the grain boundary here, let me use a different color. So if you consider the grain boundary here, the regularity in the arrangement of the atom is missing, because grain boundary is nothing but a region where two grains impinge. So two grains, they have the definite regular arrangement of the atoms. However, they have their own frames of reference, meaning they have their own orientation, and when they impinge, the regularity in the arrangement of the atoms is disturbed, and that means, according to our definition of defects, which is whenever there is a disturbance or imperfection in the regularity in the arrangement of the atoms, we refer to that as the defects. With respect to that definition, grain boundary will also be categorized under defects. Now again, if you consider a three-dimensional microstructure, the grain boundary will not be a line defect, but it will also be a plane defect. But since largely we are focusing on two-dimensional microstructures, the grain boundary can be categorized as a line defect. It is also possible other boundaries like twin boundaries, sub-boundaries, they also can be categorized under the line defect. Now let us consider one example for volume defect, and then we'll wind off this introduction to defects. So volume defects. Now, even though these volume defects are characteristic feature of the microstructure of a material, so these are largely a microstructural feature than defects, since our definition of a defect is in such a way that any irregularity in the regular arrangement or any imperfections in the regular arrangement of the atoms, we call it that as defect. Since our description or the definition is so general, the precipitations that we observe in a regularly or in a single phase system, we call that as a volume defect. Now when you have a single phase polycrystalline system, something like this, and you have your precipitations here, so these precipitations, they disturb the regular arrangement of the atoms in this single phase system, and since these precipitations, they have a definite volume, we refer to that as the volume defect. And of course, these are not usually treated as defects because these are a characteristic feature of a particular microstructure. However, since our definition of the defects is so general, and since the precipitate in principle they disrupt the regular arrangement of the atoms in a single phase system, we categorize that as a volume defect. Now, so far we have looked into different forms of the defects and one example or one or more example for each of these defects. Now, one defect we have largely overlooked, one line defect we have largely overlooked, and that line defect is dislocation. So the reason we largely overlooked this particular line defect, because our entire discussion henceforth will be focused on, for a few more lectures will be focused on dislocation. So we will be hugely focusing or extensively focusing on this particular line defect, that is dislocation, and that is the reason why in the introductory section on different defects and examples of these defects, we did not consider dislocation. Now dislocation, we have seen that defects, they affect the behavior of the material and they also affect the property of the material. The reason we would be giving a significant importance to dislocation is because in addition to influencing the behavior and the behavior of the material, particularly the mechanical behavior of the material, these dislocation help us quantify or they govern the mechanical behavior. In addition to influencing, they actually more of influencing, they actually govern the mechanical behavior of the material. They help us quantify the mechanical behavior of the material, and therefore an extensive importance will be given to dislocation in this course on mechanical behavior of material. Now, before looking into what a dislocation is or how one can observe a dislocation, how one can quantify a dislocation, we will consider how we were able to arrive at this concept of dislocation. Now, when you consider observing a dislocation experimentally to see this particular defect and identify as a dislocation is a very difficult task. You need high resolution microscopes in order to understand in order to visualize a dislocation in a real-time system. However, before the development of such high resolution electron microscope, people were able to identify the presence of dislocation. So purely based on theoretical concepts, people were able to identify the presence of dislocation. So let us see how they were able to identify this particular presence or this presence of this particular defect that governed the mechanical behavior of material. So since it is interesting to us and since it will tie up to the theoretical understanding or subsequent theoretical understanding of dislocation, let us begin by considering how, without the help of any experimental observation, people are able to conceive that the dislocations are the defects that are present in a system which is exposed to a mechanical condition. Now, when we consider the different forms of stress or the form of stress that influences or that causes the plastic behavior, we sectioned the overall stress components into two parts, that is hydrostatic stress or dilatation stress. The other was the deviatoric stress. And when you consider the deviatoric stress, it was the non-diagonal element of the stress matrix. When we include all the stress components and represent it in the form of the matrix, we saw that the deviatoric stress or the stress that causes the plastic deformation occupies the non-diagonal element. And this non-diagonal element is usually occupied by the shear components of the stress. So it is safe for us to say it is the shear components of the stress that causes the plastic deformation. So let me repeat, in the previous lectures we saw we have to distinguish between two contribution of the stresses in order to talk about the plastic deformation. The stress as a whole in a three-dimensional material experiencing triaxial loading condition comprises of 9 components acting within it, and this we have to distinguish into components that cause volumetric change and the components that cause shape change. The components that caused volumetric change, we refer to that as the dilatation or the hydrostatic stress. The components that cause the shape change, we refer to that as the deviatoric stress. We saw it is the deviatoric stress that is responsible for plastic deformation, because during plastic deformation conventionally there is not much change in the volume involved. So it is exclusively the deviatoric stress that causes the plastic deformation. And now, since the deviatoric stress they occupy the non-diagonal elements of the stress matrix, then it is safe for us to say it is the shear components of the stress that causes the plastic deformation. Now, one way of considering the plastic deformation which we have seen earlier is the permanent shift in the positions of the atoms. Now, if you consider a material of what the crystal structure of the material is, if you consider a setup like this, or let us assume a simple setup. Now, so this is the a regular one, and in that we will consider a representative setup wherein you have 2 layers of atoms. Now, when you want to have a permanent deformation in the material, the atoms should move from one equilibrium position to another equilibrium position. So, if you assume this A is one equilibrium position of this atom, the next equilibrium position is B, so the atom must move from A to B. Now, this is achieved by imposing a shear stress of tau. Now, when you impose a shear stress of tau, it is possible for the atom to move from point A to point B. Now, when you have an atom moving from point A to point B, now once the atom settles down in point B, what you end up having is atom in its new atomic position or new equilibrium position, or you have ultimately or essentially achieved a plastic deformation. Therefore, the stress required for causing a plastic deformation can be calculated by considering the shift in the atoms from one equilibrium position to another equilibrium position. So, for this simple condition, if you consider the amount of stress that is required for the atoms to move from this position to this is, if you consider the positions of the atoms between A to B. So, the second, then immediately the next position will be something here, the third position will be something here, and the fourth position will be something here. So, you will have, we are considering just the position of atoms between when it travels from A to B. So, it will immediately move to a position that is, say, for A1, A2 and A3. Now, the position A2, if we consider the position A2, it is something like this. It is directly over the atom at A2 is directly over the atom in the layer below. So, this means energetically it is highly unfavorable, or you need a sufficient amount of energy to keep the atom here and to move it in this manner. So, when you plot the energy or the stress that is required to move the atom from A to B, it gradually increases. So from A to A1, the stress that is required increases, and it reaches a peak at A2, and it begins to decrease as we move away from the peak towards the point B. So you begin in position A, and when you want to move the atom to the next position, you impose a stress, and the stress keeps on moving the atom. The highest amount of stress that is required to move the atom will be in the position A2, wherein the atom will exactly be above the atoms that is below or in the layer below. So this position here will correspond to A2, and beyond A2 it is close to the next equilibrium position, and moving the atom from A2 to B will be much easier, and therefore you get an energy plot something like this. I hope you are able to understand that, meaning you are trying to move atom from A to B, and when you begin imposing the stress condition or imposing the shear stress, the atoms begin to move, and with increase in the shear stress it keeps on moving. The maximum shear stress that is required would be when the atom reaches A2, because it is directly above the atom that is in the layer below, and once you cross the point A2, then it will be easy for the atoms to move, because it has already crossed the highest energy position and it is moving towards the other low energy state. So this would be the rather representative stress that is required to move the atom from A to B, meaning when you consider this position or express this position in terms of x, then based on the position of the atoms, the amount of stress that is required to move it varies. So from A, it keeps on increasing and reaches the maximum at A2, and again in B, and beyond A2 it keeps on decreasing and reaches the minimum at B. So with respect to this position or the position or the spatial points A, or rather x, the stress that is required to move atom A to B varies. Now, since we have the regular arrangement of the atoms or the periodic arrangement of the atom, when you plot the stress that is required to move the atoms with respect to x, when you keep on plotting it, you will end up having something like this. You can represent the overall stress that is required to move the atoms in this way, from one equilibrium position to another equilibrium position. The stress can be represented in this manner for an extended direction, for an extended spatial consideration, for extended position, or when you extend this x, you can represent the stress required in this manner. Now this is nothing but, or we can translate this as the sine curve. So we have a sine curve that is representing the stress that is required to move the atoms from one equilibrium position to another equilibrium position. Since moving the atom from one equilibrium position to another equilibrium position is the plastic deformation. Now we can say in this condition, wherein we have a regular arrangement of the atom, the stress that is required to cause a plastic deformation is in the form of a sine curve. The shear stress which is required to cause a plastic deformation is in the form of sine curve. So the stress that is required is proportional to the sine curve. So this is expressed as 2 pi x, and x is the spatial position. Now if you assume the distance between the atoms as A and the distance between the layers of atoms as B, then the stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation is expressed as, or the shear stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation is expressed as GB 2 pi A sine 2 pi x by B. So this is B, and this B is nothing but the distance between the two layers of atoms, or rather we will for our convenience refer to this as A, that is the distance between the two layers of atoms as A and distance between the two atoms as B. So distance between two layers of atoms, so interlayer spacing is A and interatomic spacing is B, and when you designate the interlayer and interatomic space as A and B respectively, then the expression for the stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation is expressed in this manner. B is the inter-atomic spacing, and A is the inter-layer spacing. Now again, the important component here, or G here, is the shear modulus, and the important component or the governing component is this, because the variable is x, so this is dependent on the position, so the variable x, and this is the variable component here. And since we have observed, or it is easy for us to understand how the stress varies with the position by comparing it with the sine curve, we have the sine relation here. Now, since we are considering a displacement that is in the atomic levels, atomic ranges, the sine 2 pi x by b is equivalent to 2 pi x by b. And therefore, when you introduce 2 pi x by b here, your whole expression, it reduces to GB 2 pi xa and 2 pi x by b. And you can cancel this out, and you will remain with rather the shear modulus G by A of x. So what this means is that whenever you want to have a plastic deformation, then the amount of stress that is required with respect to position is a fraction of the shear modulus. So this expression indicates that in order to bring about a plastic deformation, what you need is a fraction of the shear modulus. Now we have made this assumption, and therefore it has been possible for us to arrive at this expression. Supposing even without this assumption, supposing we say what would be the maximum amount of stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation, then to achieve the maximum amount of stress, the maximum value a sine can have is equal to 1. So that means to achieve the maximum amount of stress to bring about the plastic deformation, according to our consideration, would be, if you assume this to be 1, then it will be GB by 2 pi A. So this will be 1, and this term is what we will be considering. And in most systems, since B is more or less equal to A, then the maximum amount of stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation would be G by 2 pi. Now both the maximum amount of stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation and the in irregularity, when we don't consider the maximum amount of stress but just the amount of stress, then both these indicate that in both these cases, now we have to be aware that this maximum amount of stress is a constant, it is not dependent on x, it's a constant. Now when we compare both these values, that is the position dependent stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation, or the maximum amount of stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation, it is nothing but the fraction of the shear modulus. Now when you perfect your approximation, instead of just using this sine relation, if you perfect your approximation, include the vibration of the atoms and all those things, you will observe that this shear component or shear stress that is required is nothing but G by 30. So this is another derivation. So you have three expressions. So one with a simple consideration or simple representation of the stress in the form of sine wave, you end up with this expression. When you consider the maximum stress that is required for plastic deformation under the simple consideration of sine wave, you end up with this expression here. And when you relax that representation or approximation using the sine curve and do it even more rigorously, you will end up with this set of expression. So all these expressions denote that the stress that is required to bring about a plastic deformation is the fraction of the shear modulus. However, all these are theoretical values, and when you compare this theoretical value, it is significantly higher than what we observe physically. Irrespective of the approaches you take, the value that you get based on your theoretical calculation and compare it to the physical observation, the theoretical values are usually higher than the physical calculations. And this was the first time when people realized that whatever conception that we are having about the plastic deformation, it is not quite right. So there is a different phenomena that is operating during the plastic deformation. Whenever people observed based on their calculation, theoretical calculation, and when they calculated or when they related it to the physical observation, there was a significant disparity, and only then people decided, or it was decided, that the consideration that we make of a simple movement of the atoms from one portion to the another portion during plastic deformation, it is not usually consistent, or it is not what we observe in the physical case. There is a different operation or different property or different behavior that governs the plastic deformation of the material, and that is where people postulated the concept of dislocation based on the disparity between the theoretical stress that is required to introduce a plastic deformation to the physical stress that we impose in order to bring about the plastic deformation. Based on the disparity, we were able to postulate the presence of dislocation. Now, in order to add to the, or in order to substantiate, in order to make sure that the dislocation or the theory of dislocation is not something that is abstract, it is relevant to the physical condition, people are able to observe, or the researchers working on the mechanical behavior, they were able to observe that the theoretical stress that is required for plastic deformation was somewhere close to the ones you observe in the physical case when your system was made of single crystal. When you have a single crystal system and it is devoid of any defect. So when technology is sufficiently developed to bring about or to establish or to build a system of single crystal without any defect, which we refer to as whiskers, and they are usually very small in size and they are used in electronic application. So when you have something like whiskers, which is made of a single crystal and devoid of any defect, in that case your theoretical stress that is required to bring about the plastic deformation was similar to that of the stress that you observe physically when you bring a permanent change in the whiskers. However, when apart from this special condition, there was always, even when you anneal the material sufficiently, even when you have treated or heat treated the material sufficiently so that it is the pristine material that you could get, under such condition, there was a significant difference between the theoretically calculated stress to bring about the plastic deformation when compared to what you observe physically. And this disparity is what brought about the concept of dislocation. The other concept that also parallelly brought about, or it substantiated or it ensured the concept of dislocation, was based on the theory of crystal growth. And more than the theory of crystal growth, this was a more convincing, or this was this difference in the theoretically calculated shear stress to bring about the plastic deformation or to cause the plastic deformation when compared to the physical stress is what it established the theory of dislocation, or what introduced the concept of dislocation. So with this introduction, or with this historical perspective on how we are, or how we conceive this particular defect called dislocation, we will look into the dislocation even more extensively in the subsequent lectures. So we will see ourselves in the next lectures, wherein we will be considering dislocations more extensively. Goodbye.